Welcome students in class 12th English lesson 1 of Flamingo, the last lesson written by Alphonse Daudet. Alphonse Daudet, born in 1840, died in 1897, was a French novelist and short story writer. He is known to write his stories with a charming mixture of realism, humor, and sentiment. He had got listed in the army and had fought in the Franco Prussian War, so he could understand the sentiments of loss of one's identity during war. The last lesson is one of his best stories in which he shows the change in France's fortune through the eyes of a young boy from the border regions of Alsace. This story is set in the days of the Franco Prussian War, which was fought in 1870 to 71, in which France was defeated by Prussia, led by Bismarck. Prussia then consisted of what now are the nations of Germany, Poland, and parts of Austria. This story, the lesson The last lesson renders a touching and emotional adieu to the identity of the French who were being deprived not only of their political freedom but also of their language. It deals with the theme of language imposition and language loyalty. It also highlights the pain that is inflicted on the people of a territory by its conquerors by taking away their right to study or speak their own language. Franz, he started for school very late that morning. He was afraid of being scolded because Mr. Hamel was to question them on participles and he did not know the first word about them. He thought of running away and spending the day out of doors. The warm, bright day, the chirping birds, and the Prussian soldiers drilling in the open field back of the sawmill were tempting. But he resisted the temptation and hurried off to school. There was a crowd in front of the bulletin board near the town hall. Washer, the blacksmith, asked Franz not to go so fast. He assured the boy that he would get to his school in plenty of time. Franz, not to go so fast. As it was said to him by Washer that he had plenty of time. Usually, there was a great commotion, hustle and bustle when the school began. But on that day, everything was as quiet as Sunday morning. Through the window, Franz saw his classmates already in their places and Mr. Hamel walking up and down with his terrible iron ruler under his arms. Franz opened the door and went in. He blushed and was frightened. M. Hamel very kindly asked him to go to his place. Franz noticed that their teacher had put on his beautiful green coat. His frilled shirt and the little black silk cap all were embroidered. He wore these only on inspection days and prize days, whenever there was any special occasion. The village people were sitting quietly on the usually empty back benches. Everybody looked sad, and Hauser had brought an old primer. Mr. Hamel said that it was the last lesson he would give them. Henceforth, Only German was to be taught in the schools of Alsace and Lorraine. The new master would come the next day. This was their last lesson of French. He wanted them to be very attentive. Franz felt sorry that he had not learnt his lessons properly. The idea that Mr. Hamel was going away made the narrator forget all about his ruler and how cranky he was, how much strict he was. Now Franz understood why Mr. Hamel had put on his fine Sunday clothes and why the old men of the village were sitting there. They had come to thank the master for his 40 years' faithful service and to show their respect for the country that was theirs no more. Mr. Hamel asked Franz to recite, but he stood there silent. The teacher did not scold him. He confessed that his parents and he, that means Mr. Hamel, were all at fault. Then he talked of the French language, the most beautiful language in the world, the clearest, the most logical. He asked them to guard it among them and never forget it. Their language was the key to their prison. Then they had lesson in grammar and writing. At that moment only, some peasants they cooed very low on the roof. Franz thought, if they would make even the pigeons sing in German, they here means the Prussian soldiers. All the while, Mr. Hamel was sitting motionless in his chair and gazing at one thing or the other. His sister was packing their trunks in the room above as they had to leave the country next day. After writing, they had a lesson in history, and then the babies who were sitting there chanted their French language, the primers, the beginning letters. Even old Hauser was crying. All at once, the church clock struck 12 and then the midday prayers. At the same moment, the trumpets of the Prussians returning from drill sounded under the windows. Mr. Hamel stood up. He wanted to speak, but something choked him. Then he took a piece of chalk and wrote on the blackboard, as large as he could, Vive la France. That means, long live France. After this, he stopped and leaned his head against the wall. Without a word, he made a gesture with his hand to indicate that the school was dismissed and they might go. He could not speak a single word. So you can see the story centers around language chauvinism and its importance to the citizens of a country. Loss of language is a threat to one's identity and culture, and it is the duty of the citizens to safeguard it. The lesson, the last lesson, depicts how, after defeating France in the war, the Prussians wanted to rule over not only the territory of France but also over the minds and hearts of the people. The lesson reinforces the fact that we value something more when it is lost. The pain and anguish and suffering of the students and teacher is evident for everyone realizes how things are taken for granted till they are snatched away from us. Somehow, people of Alsace were too ignorant to value even the most invaluable, for they had been putting off learning everything till tomorrow. The lesson brings home the message that war not only affects soldiers and politicians or policy makers, it also changes understanding of our own values. The two main characters of the story, Mr. Hamel and Franz. Some points are here depicting Hamel's character, who is a very different shades of Hamel can be seen here. He is very sincere teacher, knows the subject very well. He is very passionate about French language. He considers French as clearest, most beautiful, logical language. Some points are here. You can just have a look to them. About Franz, who is very sensitive, honest, blames himself for ignoring his lessons. He understands the feelings of Hauser and realizes that French is not that tough. He is a very good observer. Very nicely, he observes the changes which took place, and he had an empathetic attitude. He realized the pain and suffering of Hamel. He understands emotions and accepts his fault also. So the story is in nutshell. Some word meanings are given for you to understand the story in a better way, and some questions are given. Go through them, and that's all. Thank you, children.